We are live. Hi, Paul. Thank you
Hi,
for
Phil.
joining me today.
Oh,
It's a pleasure
thanks for having
pleasure to
me.
see you. Yeah, I've been really excited to introduce you to a lot of people out there. I feel like I'm talking about you, your family setup, your family schooling, and most recently, you as an education entrepreneur. And so before we dive in to our conversation, I wanted to share a theme that I'd love us to dive into over the course of this
Cool.
conversation. I'm feeling like, with my own family's exploration of what's happening in education, changes, new trends, things shifting, especially due to the pandemic, that there's some misconceptions or people aren't quite sure what the word homeschooling or self-directed learning means. When you say that, I think people pop up with their own ideas or their own exposure to it. I
hmm
think you are such an amazing example from both personal and business to peel back the layer or the curtain and give people a little bit more understanding of the possibilities and what's happening in the world. So I thought a good place to start is if you could share how you have come here to this point as an education entrepreneur. I know you're a traveler. I know you've homeschooled your kids, but if you could give us a little bit of background, that would be amazing on who you are, Paul Bennett.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, my family and I sort of opted out of the kind of normal route through traditional school a couple of years ago, about 9 years
Yeah.
ago. And we had our kids, they were born abroad and had a slightly unusual sort of early first years of school, but then we were, decidedly mainstream, living in Philadelphia in a cute little row house and sent our kids to a beautiful neighborhood school. And there was actually nothing wrong with that.
Mm.
But we are adventurers and we had this dream of taking our kids and going on a great, family travel adventure.
Hmm.
My wife Lani and I had done something similar pre-kids. We'd sailed across the Atlantic Ocean for 2 years, and so we had that in mind. Like we got to take the kids sailing, and we'll figure school out. So we didn't quit our jobs because we were running our own company, but we bought a boat and we went down to the Caribbean and we set off. And our kids were between the ages of 5 and 10 at the time,
Yeah.
and the school that they were in said, look, they're going to get so much out of this voyage with you, don't worry about the school.
Yeah.
And we knew we would be coming back to that school, and so that was actually very comforting. So we didn't worry about school that first year. We had a real idealized vision of the journey would be the school, and we would make it up as we went along. And we got onto some homeschooling blogs, and we learned about sort of project-based learning and making these flat books and stuff like that. So we had a very light plan to
Mm.
sort of do school in each place, and it was a disaster. The first year was just a crushing defeat, and we
What's a
woke up to
disaster look like? What's a disaster?
the kids. Oh, we have good kids, so they didn't push back on us too much, but it was hard to get them to do their
Mm.
work. But more importantly, figuring out what work to be done. At
Right.
that age, you sort of have to be your kid's teacher. And we were not teachers, we were not curriculum planners, and we didn't have a plan. So at the end of the year, exhausted, Lonnie and I looked at each other and said, look, if we're going to continue sailing, and we sailed for 2 years on that trip, we're going to need a plan.
Yeah.
So we sat down, we did a lot of research on curricula. We had a very particular situation because we were living on a boat. So we were low bandwidth, constantly on the move. So that meant that a whole category of offerings that are there for homeschoolers didn't apply to us. So we could
Right.
not sign up for scheduled classes online with other
You really had to
students.
think outside the box.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we had to find stuff that was asynchronous. But luckily, there is quite a bit out there, and we found things
Mm.
that worked for us. We sort of picked and chose a few things. I think, if memory serves, we had a kind of out of the box curriculum for our youngest daughter, and then we kind of picked and chose different classes for our middle and oldest daughter. And and then we layered that into that some things that we just sort of taught to them as well. And the second year was great. It had
Mm.
structure. Everyone knew what to expect, and the kids began, honing these habits of what eventually I would come to call self-directed learning. They
Right.
weren't self-directed learners quite yet, but they were starting to kind of see, live the pattern of it. Anyhow, we did that for 2 years, went back to normal life. Normal life really didn't feel great. Our kids were, I mean, they were okay in school, but they didn't love it. And they really wanted to get back out and continue the journey. So 3 years later, we went out again. And at this point, my oldest daughter was just finishing 10th grade. So she had 2 more years of high school.
Right.
And she had seen what like real high school was like. And then behind her, her sister Cleo is 2 years behind, and then Jade's another 3 years. So we had sort of late primary through middle school into high school age kids.
Right.
And so much is at stake with a high schooler, right? I mean, she wanted to go to college, or she was on that path. We wanted her to go to college, and it's a heavy lift. You gotta get good grades from a good school, and it's hard to get into school.
Yeah.
So we were nervous about it. And, we knew, so we had this pattern from our last voyage where we had used these curricula, and that had worked out well, but we weren't sure it was enough. And specifically, the thing we knew was missing was the connection with a teacher.
Right.
When you're doing things from video, you're doing asynchronous learning, and you don't have a teacher there. I mean, all they had was us. And we have a great relationship, but we felt like that. I mean, I look back at my high school, right? And what do I remember from my high school besides, having fun with my friends is a couple of amazing teachers who changed my life. There
Right.
was Mamie Balduccio, my history teacher, just
You
blew
still
my
remember.
mind.
I love
Right? I
it.
remember these. I
Yeah.
actually am still friends with these people, and it really had a huge impact.
Wow.
So we were like, okay, how can we make that happen? And so what we decided to do was we put out an ad looking for an English language arts teacher, ELA.
Right.
And we figured we would hire a teacher to work with Stella, primarily just to keep, she's a good writer and a good reader, but to kind of keep her skills at that cutting edge so that she could, have a good college
Right.
application. So we found this amazing teacher, Hadley Roach, and we started working with her. And it was challenging because we were on the other side of the planet, 12-hour,
Time
14-hour
zones. This
time
is before we're
difference.
all in Zoom and
Right?
yeah.
Yeah, not
Yeah.
in Zoom. But we made it work, and we found kind of a pattern and a cadence that was amazing. And most importantly, the relationship that Stella built with Hadley was palpable. I mean, I could see it, feel it. She was just accelerating in her learning, and we could see this compared to everything else she was doing. And everything else she was doing was good. This was just so much better,
Because
right?
of the relationship and the connection.
The
Yeah.
relationship, the connection, the customized itinerary. I mean, curriculum. It's like an itinerary,
Yeah.
right?
You
I
can tell your
mean,
travel background. Yeah. You
right.
just had to tell there. Yeah.
But I mean, Hadley came in with one book that she knew she wanted to study with Stella. And
Mm.
then in the first few weeks, they built a reading list. They built a plan for what she was going to write about. It
Together.
evolved together, right?
Right.
So it was a
Right.
collaboration. That meant Stella had ownership. And then it was really personalized to
Right.
her and her goals. And of course, Hadley's a professional teacher. She has a master's degree from the Breadloaf Writing Institute at Middle. I mean, she's like top notch. So she
Yeah.
knew that her job was to meet Stella where she was and take her farther, right? So she was
Right.
constantly pulling Stella, farther. So we saw that and we are like, okay, this is a game changer. And the next semester we hired Hadley for the other two kids. They each have individual classes with her. We went out and
Right.
found a math teacher. We found a science teacher. We found a Latin
Yeah.
teacher. And eventually, currently today, our steady state, Stella's off at university. So, that worked out fine. And Cleo, my middle daughter, does two classes
Mhm.
with private teachers, and Jade does three. And it's completely changed our lives and our kids' lives.
Actually, I thank you for sharing that. I wanted to, before we dive into the work you're doing with supporting other families, I think one of the points of resistance or families looking into self-directed learning or homeschooling, especially if their kids are in high school, is exactly to your point. It starts to get serious, and parents are like, well, I can't just pull my kid out and do this new fandangle thing. We'll keep them in the system. We know it works. It's tried and tested. I love to use your family. And I have a lot of actually families with teens who've gone on from self-directed learning to thrive in university and beyond. But I'd love for you to just pinpoint some of the outcomes you saw with your girls if they'd stayed on the traditional track. And obviously, self-directed isn't for everyone, but for those who are like, I don't know, I'm exploring it, but I'm worried they're not going to thrive. What are outcomes you could point to for your girls due to their learning situation that you fostered?
Well, I'll give you two. Sort of the
Yeah.
really important outcome that's kind of conceptual, and then the other much less important but very tangible.
Yeah.
So the kind of the conceptual one is when you engage in self-directed learning and you take responsibility for it, you grow as a person, right?
Yeah.
So you're not on the tracks. There's no state guardrails. I mean, there's some guardrails, but not the guardrails that you have when you just are in high school and
Yeah.
every class, there's a bell that rings at the end of the class that tells you to go to the next class, right? It's like a
Yeah.
verbal existence in some level. You don't have any of that, and you have to build that. And the process of building that,
Hmm.
it has lots of outflows. There's confidence. There's a kind of mindset that evolves. But also, what you learn is you almost professionalize how to learn. You become a student of learning,
Yeah.
rather than just a student who's like trying to get through. You actually become really good at the art of learning. And that is a skill that obviously is useful in high school and useful in college and graduate level. But even
Yeah.
think, Hope, just to life today, as a
Oh my goodness. Well,
professional.
you and I
I
are
mean,
both entrepreneurs. And I think we as entrepreneurs know that that is going to, whether your girls become entrepreneurs or my kids become entrepreneurs, the life in the future is going to require them to look for opportunities and be more actualized, I think.
yeah,
Um,
and to be entrepreneurial and able to make things happen,
yeah,
even if they don't actually become entrepreneurs. The future is entrepreneurial, right?
totally.
So, I mean, our kids, I think the actuarial lifespan of our kids is like 100, right? Something like that.
Mm,
Um, that's a long lifetime, right? And they are not going to live the old fashioned, three-stage life where you spend a third of your life studying, a third of your life working, a third of your life, retired. I mean, you and I aren't even going to live that. They certainly aren't. They're going to be going in and out of, periods of work, periods of reinvestment through education or
yeah,
travel, periods of, and they're going to need to upskill all through their career. They're going to start in one place and they're going to end somewhere else, to a degree that we can't even fathom, even though we're having to do that ourselves today.
totally.
So to be a rock star learner from the get go, I mean, you're just talking about setting your kid up. Like that's the biggest outcome. The sort of less important is that if you go to a normal high school, you're in the normal track for college, and it is
Right.
incredibly competitive, and it is so hard
Never
to
been harder.
stand out. Never been
Yeah,
harder, right?
yeah,
Whereas if you go off on a different path and one that requires you to step up take responsibility, become a lifelong learner, and really learn some amazing, unusual, atypical skills, you
Yeah.
become a much better candidate. And it's
That
almost
I
like
got to put a pin in that because it's the opposite. I think of what
it's
most
the
people think.
opposite.
You get off the track and you're no longer a competitor. But I would argue, even speaking to college admissions, the more you can step into your own light and stand out as an individual, the more you are a competitor, and you are seen as an asset to any program, provided you're a great student, obviously. But I think your girls, they didn't just go to any university. I mean, they're applying to top universities. So I think it is, you may not want to boast, but I'll boast for you, meeting your girls. And I would say this for most people I have met, or actually all who have followed a self-directed path, their kids are the greatest broadcasters for this route because they shine as themselves. And I would say that is an outcome that I have noticed for sure in your girls, in meeting them on a boat in Bali. You know, they're traveling around. They are so uniquely themselves. And I'm sure you and Lani found it so cool to watch.
Yeah. I mean, a big thank you for that. And I think a part of it is, the way we set up school, but also a part of it is the way we set up school has unlocked a way of living. And we put a lot of energy and effort into that, into the non-academic part of their development, because, what we're doing here as parents is we're cooking up human beings, and human beings are not, good at math and can write and whatever. It's not just the academic subjects. It's also are they adventurous? Are they kind? Are they can they repair a diesel engine? All these kinds of things, right?
And can your girls repair a diesel engine?
Yes.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Wow. What are some other really out there skills that you've seen them develop? Just, I'm curious.
In terms of, they can do, we live on a boat, right? So they can do a lot of boaty things. They can fix stuff. They can repair fiberglass. They can surf and kite surf and free dive and scuba dive, all that kind of stuff. But I think maybe their sort of most impressive skill that's come out of our lifestyle is their ability to enter into a kind of challenging, very foreign culture. So we spent almost a year in Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, which is a very different place than Philadelphia, where we were from. And our kids are super comfortable in places like that. They're happy to eat, taro and sticky cabbage and all of that, and go in. We dragged them all the time into the villages, because you have to, when you sail into a village, you have to go meet the chief and
you're
ask
forced
permission.
to. Right.
Yeah. So, some boats would go in and the captain, which is usually the dad, would go ashore and meet the chief and drink kava with them. And no, we dragged our kids up to the hut, sit on the ground, make the kava, have a sip of it. They'd have to carry me home in Vanuatu because the kava is
moonshine.
But those experiences, I think, are as important, if not more important, than some of the academic stuff that they've done.
Well, I know that cruising, which is, you've taught me the terminology for families that boat around the world, cruising, right? Cruising isn't for everybody. And our family loves to travel, and we would consider ourselves quite nomadic. I don't know if cruising is for us, but I think the actual, for some families, it's brilliant for periods. But I think it's finding that recipe that works for you, right?
Right.
And
100%.
I think for some people it's cruising, some people it's taking a sabbatical, and maybe you're noticing this, and I'm keen to dive into your work with CICERO learning, is that the pandemic has done a bit of a shakeup to everybody.
Right.
And you guys traveled before the pandemic. We did also. And I think now the pandemic, I'm noting that people are assessing they're reflecting, they're asking questions, and they've also seen their kids in school and seen what they're learning due to the Zoom online classrooms and being like, hey, wait a minute, I'm not so sure this is the best way possible. So I'm noting an uptick of families looking for different options or opportunities, which I'd love to hear what you're noting. You're currently where, Paul? Tell us where you are.
I'm in Cape Town, South Africa.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And that you found yourself in Cape Town. And are you noticing more and more people contacting you saying, hey, Paul, tell us more about your lifestyle, or how do we do what you're doing?
Yeah, 100%. So, at the beginning, you were sort of asking some questions about kind of categories, homeschoolers and da. So
Right.
there's two big buckets, which is people who go to a normal brick and mortar school and people who don't.
Right.
And prior to the pandemic, it was pretty healthy, and we can call that group who don't homeschoolers, although
Right.
they then divide into lots of really interesting groups, which we should talk about. But that group was like 4% of the population, I think, 3 and some change in the
US.
United States, in the
Right.
US.
Yeah.
And that's it's a pretty big group, and we were part of that group. We were off sailing around. After the pandemic, everyone's gone back to school. That number is more than doubled. So I think we're up at like 7% of the
Yeah.
U.S. school
I think it's
population.
actually 8 now. I
Eight.
just saw a
Okay.
stat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's growing. I mean, we need to keep on top of it because that number is
I
growing
know.
very, very
Yeah.
quickly. So yeah, I mean, our phone is ringing off the hook with families who have stepped out of that first bucket, and
Yeah.
now they're in this second bucket, but they're not sure like where to be in that bucket. So, one big part of that bucket is homeschoolers who have been homeschooling for a long, long time. And I've been connected to this group ever since we went on that first boat trip. And they, live lots of different kinds of lives. There's the, sort of prototypical living in a rural area and living off the land, whether they're, to the right politically or left, they sort of all meet around in the back and they're,
Yeah.
and then you've got this group who do that on the road. So world schoolers.
Right.
And,
We
some
dipped
of
our
them
toes into that.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you have some people who do that like hardcore all the time and they're in a boat or RVing. There's a lot of RV schoolers out there, and that's grown.
Right.
It's a lot during the pandemic. And then you have this cool group like yourselves, you and Charlie and your kids, who have kind of dipped in and out and have dipped in. And then instead of dipping back, like when you guys went on your
Yeah.
tour, which was close to a year, right? Where
It
you were
was a year.
traveling
Yeah.
around. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
2018.
you wind
And
up
then
in
we were
Bali,
like, we can't put the genie back in the bottle. So then we
right?
landed a school in Bali. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And not just any school. I mean, that school is on the
The green
spectrum.
school. Yeah.
So and now Sophia's off, doing it again, and your
Yeah.
family is thinking about options. And we've been talking to a lot of families like this who have been thinking for a long time, dreaming about, oh, maybe we should go do, fill in the blank. Um, and now post pandemic, they see that they can work from anywhere, their kids
Mm-hmm.
can school from anywhere. And so, okay, let's have more serious conversations about this. And then their conversations are like, but how exactly is it going to work? And one of the big sticking points is education, especially if you've got
Yeah.
a high school age kid and the stakes are high and you're like, God, what if I screw it up? And
Mm-hmm.
I totally get that because I was there, and frankly, I'm still there. I mean, I don't have all the answers, and I still worry, like any parent, like God, is it really, is this exactly the right path? But of course, we're now
But
at a
Paul,
point.
sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt you, but I would say even parents who put their kids into the top schools anywhere, there's always that
sure,
voice in the back of your head being like, should I be doing something different? Am I doing the
right.
right job as a parent?
hmm Yeah, but you have delegated a huge amount of responsibility to the
Yes.
school, and so when
Mm,
you and schools are a lot about brands, the very best public schools, the very best private schools, and parents are doing the job of sort of an investor in that and saying, I need to pick the right brand. And once I
Mm.
have, like, I'm going to put
Leave it and set
TV
it.
there. Yeah, set it and forget it, right?
Yeah.
And so this is different, and maybe harder, because you're not setting and forgetting it. You're
Mm.
like, building a business or building anything, you're constantly analyzing, constantly tweaking, constantly making sure, okay, next semester, is anything, you're always asking, is there anything here that we can improve that would really help,
Yeah.
Jade, Cleo, Stella in my case. Um, but I love that because it means that I'm like engaged, I'm thinking about it. What it's done for us, this lifestyle, is it's made us great communicators with each other. So we don't do anything in our boat school without buy-in from the kids, right? So,
Mm.
in fact, I just
Do you have family
before
meetings? Do you have your family
uh,
meetings, or less
we have
formal?
they're less formal. We eat dinner together every night, so we sort of
Yeah.
have a little bit of discussion. But then it's more pointed. For example, just before I got on this call, Jade and I, for several days, she's taking a computer science class that is
Hmm.
self-directed. So it's all on Khan Academy. She did all the coding. Now she has to do a project. This is me. This is less self-directed. This is me saying, okay, for this to be a course, you have to do a
Yeah.
project. You have to build something.
Yeah.
And we had a meeting, an hour-long meeting. It was on the calendar. Sat down. Okay, what are your project ideas? I gave her feedback. At the end of the day, she picked a project, in collaboration with me. And my
Yeah.
job is to sort of curate that, push it along, be a bit of an impeller, be a support, whatever it takes. I mean, frankly, it's not that much different than
In
professional
your
life.
work.
Working with.
But what's cool is for entrepreneurs, and again, this lifestyle is not for everybody, but we spend a lot of time supporting, coaching, mentoring, getting in the weeds with people who aren't in our
Right.
family. And I think it changes the dynamic when you're able to have conversations like that with your kids. And it
Mhm.
really opens up pathways for new interests and ways to connect, especially during the teen years. So I think that's another outcome, Paul. I'll just raise my hand that I'm already seeing the benefits in our own family. Um, I would love for you to share a bit more about this company that you're building. I mean, you've gone from cruising and hodgepodge piecemealing your amazing education for your girls, because I've seen their transcripts. You've been so lovely to share. I'm like, what does a transcript look like from a girl or three girls who school on a boat? And people, let me tell you, these are mind-blowing transcripts. But I guess uh, you realized at some point, I think I got a business here. What happened?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, just the transcript, that's 100% Lani. She's the graphic, she's got an art background, graphic design, and then she really studied what should go in the
Okay.
transcript.
Right.
And we're a partnership. So one of the, so yeah, we woke up one day and realized there's definitely a business here, at least for this niche
Hmm.
sector of world schoolers and homeschoolers who sort of see the world through the lens that we see it. And we're lucky that that segment is growing. So we're sort of launching into a growing
You're well
market.
positioned. Yeah.
It, I mean, the story is sort of similar to our first business, which you alluded to before, as a travel business, and
Hmm.
came out of our own experience as world travelers. And we, experienced the pain in that business. What we did is called context travel. I mean, it still exists today. And it connects intellectually curious travelers. So that's us. We love to learn
Hmm. Hmm.
with local experts. And we had encountered that pain living on a sailboat pre-kids. This is when we sailed across the Atlantic. And I was working as a journalist. And every place we went to, I needed to find a local expert who could be my source to write a story
Mm.
for Islands Magazine or National Geographic or whoever I was working for. So that business solved that problem. The same with Cicero, right? So we have this problem, which is we need a really great teacher. It's not me. I'm not a great math teacher. I'm not a great biology teacher.
Right.
I'm not even, all my degrees are in sort of humanities and literature. I'm not even a good
Teacher in
writing and
those.
English,
Right.
right?
And then let's
Guess
not
what?
forget the parent-child connection. We're
There's this,
talking about building
exactly.
connections.
Yeah.
It's still not great to be the
Yeah.
sole teacher for all families, I think. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, some families it works out really well, and I've met
Right.
it's usually moms, not always, but I've met a lot of moms who are their children's teachers, and they are amazing.
Mm,
That's that's not us. I mean, between Lani and I'm more that way, and I do sort of guide a few classes with the kids. But
right.
look, we realized we have a problem here. We need professional help. so
Call in
so
the help. Right.
they go, so, we just, we're living the product. We can see it right in front of us.
Yeah.
Like, this is
Yeah.
amazing. It is helping our kids. So, as we were floating through Indonesia a few years ago, we were like, let's think through this. Like, how would it work? And a
Yeah.
lot of the ways we were thinking about it are very similar to how we thought about context. It's matching, it's finding, an incredible group of teachers, vetting them, curating them, making sure we know sort of what their style and approach and skill sets are, and then figuring
Hmm.
out a way to understand what it is that our families need,
Hmm.
our customers. That's a much more complicated issue than with the travel company because generally everybody wants more or less the same thing, like an amazing tour
Right.
of the Vatican with their top expert. um, Families are a little different, right? You've got kids at different age levels, you've got kids with different learning styles. We have
Right.
families coming in who have learning difficulties. A
Yeah.
family knocked on our door the other day, and their 16-year-old has selective mutism. And so there's some
Mm,
challenges there, and we're not going to be able to address all of those challenges. I mean, that's kind of a big issue with education generally, but
right.
there are a lot of needs that we probably can fill with by matching expert
Right.
and student. The other key thing we've learned, and we couldn't articulate this out of the box, but we started kind of putting this together and getting families in and setting them up
Hmm.
with teachers, is that it's very much a sort of three-way contract. I mean, everyone's talking about contracts these days because of blockchain, but
Mm,
it's like a three-way agreement. You've got the student, with the student kind of at the center of it. Um,
hmm.
you've got the student's needs, interests, aspirations, but you need to have buy-in from teacher, student, and family. Right? The family has goals. They have
Totally.
things that they want to accomplish. We need to know
Yeah.
what that is. We have student, she has needs and desires and interests. And then we've got a teacher who's got a skill set and an approach. And those things
Mm,
all have to triangulate together to make magic happen. And
yeah.
that's like the IP of the business, is that's what we're
Mm.
building, is that ability to pull that together.
Well, you are very much a relationship person, and I've seen this in the way you run your business, how you travel with your family. So, from our perspective, we are users of the Cicero platform. I think watching you guys with your kids was enough for us to say, you know what? The high school situation isn't working so brilliantly for Sophia. Why don't we give this a go? I think knowing that there is this sort of backbone to it that does have academic rigor, but also there's an ability for it to be very customized and
Mm-hmm.
relationship based. And for us, it it actually really forced us to pause and think, what kind of outcomes do we want for our child's learning? Which is not
Yeah.
something when you set it and leave it, it's not something that you think about actively. So we were forced to actively think, what do we want here for Sophia
Mm-hmm.
and Alfie again? And one of them was, we want them to love learning. And we noticed being back in the system's pretty stressed out right now. The teachers are stressed out, the students are stressed out, families are stressed out. So
Mm-hmm.
it felt overwhelming, I think, especially for Sophia. And I have to give you guys a shout out. I think one of the coolest things about your program, CICERO Learning and self-directed learning with one teacher, is they're being seen. The kids are being seen. And I think in today's world, to really be seen and listened to, and to be able to co-create and collaborate, builds a confidence from another place. And we noticed Sophia, who was feeling overwhelmed in a system that was like taxed and stressed out. People sort of take it as like, it is just what it is. It's stressy, it's awful, just school, do it. And we were like, you know what? We're going to try this and just watch how she responds. Paul, in 6 weeks, no, it's 5 weeks. She physically looks better. She's so excited about her learning. She's taking English with one of your teachers who has, like your girls, they've created this book list that is like 12 books deep for a 13-week program, on top of writing, on top of poetry. I mean, the amount she's doing is crazy compared to school, but she's loving it.
I mean,
really cool.
One of the things that the point you're making is if you focus on fundamental principles like confidence and unlocking creativity, what then follows is you have a confident learner who's like super excited and on fire, and then the rigor happens. Like it's a byproduct of the keeping the house in order. 100%. Yeah,
I mean, one of the things that we were concerned about, like lots of parents, and I want to bring this up publicly, is we were like, she's pretty organized, but can she really handle this? And that's something that parents are like, well, you know, in high school, do we really want to drop her in and see if she can handle this self-directed, figuring out some of the courses she's taking on her own, some she's taking with teachers in person, and some with you guys. And we were like, that's a lot to handle. But you know what? In 5 weeks, she's figuring out her systems. She's learning how to schedule. She's learning how executive function, like, you know, organizing herself. Those are life skills that I think some kids who had their hands held all the way through. I'm speaking to kids who are getting out of university or in university, and they're like, I don't even know what to do. No one's telling me, so I don't know how to turn or what's a priority. And I kind of feel like that is something I want to highlight for anyone on the edge of like, is this a good route? I think that the skills that come from this setting are super important for life.
I agree. I think the setting is sort of sets it up. You need to have these skills to survive in the setting. I think there's a lot of work to be done, and you and I have been having a lot of conversations about this, of building resources for kids to teach them how to be organized, productive, balanced. You know, and you think about, I mean, there's so much out there for professionals. And it's probably because when we were in high school, we didn't learn any of this stuff, or college. And so like the college graduate you just mentioned, I mean, I was clueless when I got out. I'm still a little clueless. So there's an incredible industry out there of productivity hacks for professionals, and serious professionals who want to, you know, move through a corporation or start a business or whatever. They invest a lot in upskilling in those areas and being really, really on their game. Well, why aren't we providing those tools to high schoolers and middle schoolers, right? I mean, why wait until you're in the workforce to learn this stuff? No, learn it early. I'm not saying it's like top priority. It should, you know, forget physics, learn, you know, how to Marie Kondo your life. But you do need to start early on figuring out how to be productive, organized, be on top of your work. You know, that when we had our kids in Rome, you know, the kids were born in Rome and they did their first schooling there, and we sent them to this beautiful little Montessori school. It was my first time, you know, being exposed to Montessori teaching. And of course, they have this concept of work. Everything that kids do is work. It's fantastic. They're doing their work. We're doing our work. They're doing their work. So why don't we develop, you know, tools to help them learn how to do their work better? And so I think there's as we've discussed before, there's a lot of
Yeah,
work to be done here to build productivity tools for kids.
I agree. And I think for some, it's, tiny little tidbits that they could try out, or kids when they're in a pickle in the regular system and
Yeah.
they need study skills. Like, my mind has been on, not everyone wants to jump into being a global nomad. Fine. But I think there are elements or ingredients from that lifestyle that could benefit even families who will never go away and travel, or maybe never homeschool their kids. And so I'm trying to find ways to inspire families who are looking from the outside of, like, maybe we could try this for a semester to get our kids back into loving learning, or take a year sabbatical just to reconnect as a unit. And that is a benefit. I wonder if there's ever opportunity for CICERO to do like one course. Do you ever work with families who have their kids in regular school and they need like one course support? Do you do that as like a bridge? I guess what I'm saying is, like, the old paradigm to this new paradigm, what bridges are we helping people to,
Yeah.
cross that gap?
We have done that. We had a sorry, we had a family this past fall that did that. Um, it was challenging, and there were pluses and minuses to it. One of the minuses is that school is overwhelming. You're there whatever
Right.
7 hours a day, and so if you're going to add on a class in
Yeah.
addition to school, it's more work.
Yeah.
We started doing it in the afternoon, and then that conflicted with activities, so then we did it on the weekend, and now the kid was going to school all week and then
Too
doing
much.
Saturday. Too much, right? It was
Right.
overwhelming, and I think it's important to be sensitive to that. On the other hand, this child was not getting. This was a it was also an English language arts class. This
Right.
child was just not there in terms of writing, and in a semester, we were able to really help him level up, and emerge as a much stronger writer. So,
Right. I guess
yeah,
it's
I think
work, maybe even working with, I can see an ideal would be if a school was like maxed out, or the child is
right.
in the public system, not a private school, and they're just not getting their English or their math because of the classroom dynamics, because of whatever factors, to literally take that child for that
Yes,
class and say, we're
if they
going to
could. Yes,
plug
if they could
in,
take an hour
a
out of
plug in.
school and then go. Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
I mean, that would be ideal, but we can dream. I
Hmm.
think we're all in the business of innovating. And my passion is to connect people with new ideas and inspire them that there's a lot of different possible pathways, especially for our kids' future. I think there's a lot of people feeling like there's not much hope, there's not much possibility, for where education is going, and I believe otherwise. I think there's
Hmm.
so many cool things. I'd love to sort of end by you sharing what amazing inspiration you've gotten in the education industry right now. Like, what are you totally inspired by?
Well, there's so much going on. I mean, even
Give us a little
alum
snack. What are you
alum.
what are you witnessing?
I mean, what you shared with me, Prisma, and of course everyone's looked at Galileo. These are amazing platforms that are going to
Hmm.
change education. They're well funded. They're getting students in, and I think just kind of in a macro sense, they're going to have a very positive impact on education. I love the micro school concept,
Mm,
which is almost like a WeWork for education.
yeah.
And frankly, if there was one near us, we probably would also sign up for that, right? So, in case your listeners don't know, I mean, all these micro schools are a little different, but there was one I think down in Georgia that I was really interested in. That is basically you sign your kid up. I think it's a subscription service. They can go for X number of hours a day, and
Yeah.
it's just a space for them to work, be with other kids, it's like a maker space so they can do projects and things. It's just a lot of stuff there. There's also a hangout place for parents if they want to socialize, and it's beautifully designed. I think that concept is super exciting because it's a flexible, and
We
it's
also love that one, and I've got my eye on a bunch. They're popping up because
yeah.
the overhead infrastructure isn't expensive. They don't need a hefty brand, and I think the online experience, that you guys are having and we're having, you can get the best teachers in the world, and there's still that factor we haven't even talked about, but it's the socialization. And I think that's often a concern of parents. Like, I don't want my child to just be online and not be in the social setting of school. I would argue, and you guys would probably support, is that there's all sorts of other social settings that you can have your kid be immersed in that don't look like the school hierarchy. That isn't always the healthiest one. I think there are, clubs and volunteering and having jobs, and, socialization looks like all sorts of things. It doesn't have to just look like school.
Yeah. Yeah. No, my kids have an incredibly vibrant social life. And, and they're very different. I mean, my two kids who are still at home. So Cleo, my oldest, who's, graduating this year, she is super, super social. So she is, she's in life saving down at the beach. She volunteers at the aquarium. She's got friends, she's always doing something social. And then Jade, who's much quieter, more introverted, definitely the kind of kid that you think, wait a minute, she's homeschooling. Is she going to become like antisocial? Oh my God, that kid is also, I mean, she goes to dance class twice a week. She goes to theater class on Saturday. She plays tennis. She also volunteers with the dog, SPCA
Shelter.
place, dog shelter,
I
right?
know.
So it's like,
I'm so glad we're ending on this, because this is what people are like, homeschool equals my child has no social life. And I think as we come out of the pandemic and there's micro schools, there's, so many options for your kids.
And the social, I would argue, is perhaps healthier because, in school, some unhealthy things happen, right? I mean, never in your life are you stuck together with 40 people the same exact age as you, right? In your life, you're always dealing with people older than you and younger than you. And so, like Jade, when she goes and works at the dog shelter, her friends are all like 21 years old, and then she goes to dance and she's got younger kids in there, or theater rather, she's got younger kids. And so she's having to, and as a result, like we never hear any of the stories you hear from like middle school and, of like bullying and, people being mean to each other. It's like, no, they actually move on because their social life looks a lot like society. And we're not animals.
No.
We want to work with each other. I just think something sometimes goes sideways when we put kids in really unusual, unhealthy environments, like with 40 of their, exact same age kids.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm noticing the same with Sophia. She is thriving and has different friends and different kinds of social interactions, which I love. I would love for you, Paul, to share with our listeners who may be parents, who could be educators, who could be entrepreneurs, curious about what's happening in the education space. How can people reach you? How can they find you?
Sure. So they can, we have a website, so you can go to CICEROlearning.com. And we have a Twitter feed. I think it's Cicero Learn. And we have
I'll put all of these in the links.
Yeah, right. And my email's scattered through all of that, so people can email me, phone me, whatever.
You're an amazingly collaborative chap, which I really love. And you and Lani and Paul just actually put up a really cool link to behind the scenes of CICERO. What do these classes look like? I thought that was such a great idea, and I'll invite everybody to take a look who's curious. Paul, thank you so much for your time and a little splash of sunshine from South Africa to me in chilly Quebec. And
You're welcome.
we love what you're doing. Our family's benefiting, and I hope more people reach out and find out more about you guys.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about something I love.
I can tell. Take care, Paul.
All right, bye-bye.